This is the Dożyn, a knife handmade in Poland. It has features I have not seen on any other bushcraft knife. And the best part is, it's $137 Canadian. If you're interested, keep watching. Before we get started, I do want to thank the maker of the Dożyn for sending this knife out to me so that I could share it with you. Now, out of respect, I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name. I'll put it across the screen and I'll put his name and his contact information and all the other information I'm about to give you about this knife in the video description for your reference. So they reached out to me and offered to send me this knife, and I was really honored, highly honored that they did, because as far as I'm aware, there may be only one or two other English-speaking language YouTube channels where this knife has been reviewed, including Dutch bushcraft knives. So I'm very honored that they thought I would do a good review of it. Now, as I mentioned, it has a feature, at least one feature, that I have not seen on any other bushcraft knife so far, and it's very unique. And, well, we'll get to that in a moment. But honestly, the way to start this out, as always, is with the sheath. So I'll bring the camera down, I'll look at the sheath, I'll show you the knife, I'll go through its specifications, I'll talk about that unique feature about this knife, and then we'll get to doing some testing. So as always, we'll start with the sheath. So let me remove the knife, lay it down for a moment. So the sheath is made of Kydex, and I have a few comments on it. The first thing I'm going to say is absolutely functional. So don't get me wrong, it's a good sheath in terms of functionality. But here are my comments. To start with the Kydex itself, a little thinner than you see on a lot of Kydex sheaths. That's not a problem as long as it remains secure, and it does, as you'll see in a moment. Very simple pancake design. The attachment for the belt loop on the back, also made of Kydex, strangely thicker for some reason. I guess that can take a lot of torque, so that's probably why it is thicker. The belt loop itself, simple nylon webbing, just a simple sheath, right? Now, there are drain holes. Somebody asked about why don't I show drain holes and on sheaths usually, and I guess I just take for granted that people know they're there, but I'll start showing them. 3 holes drilled right through the sheath itself. So not a hole out of the bottom, but 3 little holes drilled on the sides through to the back. One comment I'll make about the belt loop itself is that the nylon webbing is very, very flexible, very soft, very flexible, more so than I would like to see on a knife sheath. Now, don't get me wrong again, this is very strong. It's not going to rip, it's not going to break, it's not going to come off of your belt, but the way I like to wear knives is off a dangler, drop down a little bit lower, below the hip belt of my backpack, and I have a dangler that on my belt right now that I have been carrying this on, and when it's on that dangler, it's just way too flexible. So after this video, I'll be replacing this. That'll be a very easy job. 2 screws to remove, a heavy-duty piece of nylon webbing from a belt, and then I'll have a much better feeling about it dangling around all over the place. Now, let's get the knife, put it back into the sheath. Yeah, that's secure, you know. Now, I'm going to take it and shake it, but I suppose if I really, really came onto this, I could probably cause the knife to fall out, but if I have to do harder shaking than that to get a knife out, you know, I don't consider it an issue at all. The nice thing is it's secure in the sheath, but boy, is it ever easy to get out at the same time and to replace. So they did a good job of designing the sheath. I think with that one thing, the improvement here on the belt loop itself. All right, let's go through a few basic specifications, then I'll get into design, and then I'm going to talk about the unique feature that this knife has. So overall length is 9.2 inches from tip to pommel. Blade length 4.3 inches. Blade thickness 0.129 of an inch, or 3.3 millimeters. I like that. I like anything between 3 and 3.5 for a bushcraft knife. The weight for this knife is 7.4 ounces. The steel, and now we're getting to the special feature, but I won't talk about it yet, is 52-100 high carbon steel, hardened to between 59 and 60 on the Rockwell scale. But that's only going to tell half the story. The rest I'll get to in a minute. The finish on the steel itself, as you can see, is a bead blasting. It's a very smooth bead blasting. It's not a special finish on the outside, just a bead blasting. And you can see, yeah, I have been really heavily using this knife because, well, again, I'll get to it in a minute. And yeah, you do have to take care of it. 52-100 is a high carbon steel. There's no chromium in this, or if there is, it's very little. It will rust, so you do have to take care of it as you would any other knife, of course. Now the scales, they're kind of special as well. This is a jute micarta, which has also been sandblasted. Can you see the texturing? It is. very, very grippy. And I have found a few times over the winter testing this that if my hands got cold and wet especially, that really helped a lot. That really held on to the mold. Now I'll give you a few more comments on the ergonomics on that in a moment. All right, now I'm just going to go through the knife features and then we'll get into that. Again, that special feature. So here's the thing. It is a drop point design with a spear tip on the end. It is central to the center line of the knife. It looks like it's actually lower than the center line, but I put a ruler on it, tip through the pommel, and it is dead center on there. It's just the shape of the blade itself. It is a full Scandinavian zero grind. The micro bevel that you may be able to see on that is stropping. That's it. There wasn't, that shininess didn't even exist when the knife first arrived. It's only exists now because of the stropping that I've been doing on it. By the way, the scales are held on with Allen bolts on either end. There is a lanyard loop, and there is an exposed pommel. Again, I'll have a comment on that in a few moments' time. One of the features that I really appreciate that they've done here is this chamfering of this edge right up here. Boy, is that ever, right at the pinch grip, right there, right? Is that ever comfortable? And I'll talk more about that when I do some carving and making some tent pegs with it in a moment. That is a great feature. They did it on both ends as well, so the exposed pommel comes out further than you might think it does away from the jute micarta right there. Okay, so those are the features. Now, there is a feature about this knife and the blade that I think could be altered ever so slightly, and that is the sharpening choil. I think the sharpening choil is a little larger than it needs to be, and you could get that tiny bit more blade to come back. It's not a big deal for most people. I guess what I prefer to have is that when I bring my hand, let's get the sleeve out of the way here. It's not that cold out anymore. When I get my hand all the way forward on the knife, I'd like to have the edge start right where the blade protrudes out of my hand. That way I can get all the way back where I gain the most power and the most control. But that's where the sharpening choil is. So it's not big enough for a finger. It's definitely not. Don't put your finger there. You will cut yourself. But it could be a little bit further back and it would still be functional as a sharpening choil. So that's the only other small thing that I want to mention. All right, now let's talk about the special feature that I keep referencing. Just one more thing to show you here. I don't know if it'll show. The maker's mark is just a KW, initials for the maker's name. That's all there is for maker's mark on this knife. So what is that special feature for this knife? The heat treat. And this is unique. Now, I was aware of this type of heat treat because I have friends who are blacksmiths, and I had one who specialized in this type of heat treat because it's used more often on swords than it is on knives. In fact, this is the only knife I've ever heard of it being used on. So this has been hardened to bainite. Now, knife steel nerds out there will know exactly what I'm talking about. Many others may not. I have just a surface understanding of how this actually happens and what the benefits of it are. But let's just talk about steel metallurgy on a very low level, okay? Only because I think it will help. When you start with a high carbon steel like the 52-100 and you shape it into the blade shape, and now you're going to harden it into the hardness that you want, you heat the steel up to a point where it goes non-magnetic. In other words, a magnet won't stick to it. There's a name for that level at that given temperature when the steel is heated. Then you very quickly quench the steel in some type of a medium. Some steels it's water, some steels it's air hardening, and a lot of steels it's a special quenching fluid, very much like an oil, like a vegetable oil or a motor oil. People who make knives at home will often use just motor oil or vegetable oil. It works, but there are other mediums or other oils or liquids or fluids, if you will, designed specifically for heat treating steel. This knife is not heat treated like that. When it's heat treated in oil, brought it down to room temperature, the steel is known as martensite. It's the grain structure in the steel that has gone from a very soft to a very hard state, martensite, and that is as hard as the steel can possibly get. Too hard, in fact, to be used as a knife. So then it has to be tempered. In other words, the hardness has to be backed off a little bit by a low temperature heating of the steel, the blade itself, so that it's not at full hardness. It's somewhere back away from that full hardness, but again, not all the way to this full softness. Bainite is different, and what makes bainite different is rather than being dipped in that heat treatment fluid that brings the temperature all the way down, the knife is placed in a salt bath. When I say a salt, it's a liquid salt. Now, not your regular salt, sodium, like your table salt, but salts of a material that are heated to a specific temperature. The knife goes in, and that's where it stays for a period of time. Now, I've heard anything from a couple of hours to even a couple of days, and then the knife is allowed to cool after that. So rather than plunging all the way from the high temperature of maybe 1500, 1700 degrees Fahrenheit all the way down to room temperature, turning the steel into martensite, it passes through a couple of different phases and stops at bainite before it reaches martensite. So that's held like that, and that's what creates the steel. Now, why would you want to do that? Because obviously there's extra works, extra expense, extra time involved in creating bainite steel as opposed to martensite steel. Well, I know from a sword maker friend of mine that the purpose is it creates a hardness on the steel that is almost as hard as it would be if it was martensite, but the toughness is extraordinary. It's almost legendary among knife makers what you can achieve by going through the process of creating bainite, extremely tough steel. So it'll take a lot of flexing, a lot of bending or not bending, but a lot of flexion, if you will, without bending, without breaking, without chipping. And that is, of course, something you want in a sword. It's yet to be proven, well, I'll give you my thoughts on it in a few minutes' time, how valuable it is on a knife. Now, normally, that also means the steel is a little less hard than at bainite, or at martensite, if you will, so the Rockwell is a little lower. But there are formulas and processes to get the best of both worlds. Bainite steel, that is still at a reasonable hardness, so you don't have to keep sharpening it because it dulls so quickly. And that has been achieved on the Dożyn for sure. So the claim for this knife is that it should be much tougher than any other heat treat on that given steel, the 52-100. And well, let's put it to the test, and I'll show you what it looks like in action, and I'll give you my thoughts on that. Okay, as always, my first test is batoning with the knife. Now, this log is maple, I do believe. I won't know for sure because there's no bark on it until I split it open. It is about 13 inches in length, and it is a full 3 to 3.5 inches in diameter, and it has knots, as you can see. I chose this specifically because, well, if it's a knife that is as tough as it claims to be, it should be able to handle the batoning through this piece of wood. I have been really using this knife hard, and I can tell you so far the knife has passed my tests supremely. It's held an edge, not rolled, not chipped. I do sharpen it when I get it home. I do put it mostly on a strop, and I've been putting it through some heavy batoning and other woodworking with it. So I know this is going to be a bit of a challenge. There is a bit of a check here. I'm actually going to take advantage of that because why wouldn't I? So the knife, as you can see, just barely spans it. I expect I'm going to have a bit of a challenge just getting through all the knots on this, but let's give it a go and see what happens. All right, that was less of a challenge than I expected. And here's something I've been doing. Whenever I get to this point and I have no tip left, I would hesitate to do this on any knife with a wooden handle, but I don't hesitate to do it on this knife because of the protruding tang and the micarta. Oh yeah, that's maple. Good. Whew. A little worried because maple is what I like to feather stick. Oak is a lot harder to do so. So I'll just throw, you know what, let's grab a piece. Where's one with the knot? Right through here. Yeah, there's a knot. We'll do one more split. I don't often do multiple splits on camera, but right through the knot. Yeah, no issues whatsoever. I didn't expect because, like I said, I've been using this for quite a while now. All right, I am going to split the rest of these down. I want to get a few pieces that I know I can do some feather sticking with, but even before we get to feather sticking, we have to create a tent peg. Okay, I've chosen 2 sticks here for turning into tent pegs, but I think what I'll do, this is going to become the tent peg. I just want to show you a little bit more batoning with the knife. Now, vertical batoning is hard enough if there's knots in the wood, but it's nowhere near as hard on a knife as is cross grain batoning like this. This is what really can be hard on a knife for sure. So I've done a lot of this as well, as I'll demonstrate here. That was a bit too easy. We got to find something a little bit heavier than that. Let's see. How about this one? You know what? There's a knot right there. I'm going to put it right on top of that knot and have at it. If this doesn't damage the knife, I don't know what would. Right through that knot. Oh yeah, that's hardwood right there. Let's have a look. Across my nail. Nothing. Nothing that I can see or feel. Yeah, I didn't expect, because I've done this quite a few times. All right, now where is this one? Let's take this one back. We're going to turn this into a tent peg. So the tent peg, and the whole point of this demonstration, again, is to show some control and some carving technique. Little stop cut. Creating an L7 type of a notch. All right, and now we'll put a point on the other end. All right, again, the point of this exercise is not so much just can the knife put a point on a stick, is how does it feel to use it in reverse grip like this? And I can tell you right off of the top, I'm loving that ramp right there for doing this purpose. So we'll use the chest lever, cut, and sometimes I wonder why I choose hard woods to do this with, but it's not a test unless you challenge yourself some, or challenge the knife. All right, yeah. See, that puts a point on very, very quickly on this, and that's due directly to the fact that it is that zero grind, Scandinavian grind on the knife that digs in and bites in so nicely. All right, a few thoughts on using the knife to create a tent peg. Number one, carving. When I carved the L7 notch right here, it's a good fine tip. It's not as fine as a carving knife, but it's finer than a lot of the knives I've tested. And this makes great for doing this type of a carving action. It works out quite well. Yeah, that works out well. In reverse grip, the handle is comfortable. I can place my thumb on that ramp right there and do a great job of using it with chest lever. One small thing that I'll mention is where the pommel protrudes out through here, it's kind of sharp. It's sharp enough that you could scrape something with it if that's what you want to do. It's just not long enough for mostly for the scraping tasks I would do with a pommel. I appreciate that it's extended because that allows me to hit with a baton without worrying about damaging the scales on the knife. But I am going to just smooth that off, round off those corners right there, because in reverse grip, when it's in my palm, I can feel it right down here. Just a slight bit, and it's not necessary for it to be sharp, so I'm going to remove that. All right, so that is creating a tent peg. Now let's do some feather sticking. Creating a feather stick. This is one of the splits off of that same piece of maple. Looks pretty good right here. There are some pinhole knots and the like, but we'll see where this goes from here. Find the edge where it starts to engage. Do some nice light ones to make sure they stay on. Move out towards the tip a little bit. Yeah. I'm saying that this will feather exceptionally well. Again, no surprise, and that is for a couple of reasons. One is that thin 3.3 millimeter stock, the geometry of the primary bevel, the Scandinavian grind, and the fact that it does come to a 0-degree edge on it means that this will do a great job of feathering. However, in the wrap-up, I am going to talk a little bit more about the profile of the handles and my grip and how comfortable it is. All right, next step, scraping. All right, scraping. So I have a little piece of wood here where the ground is still soaking wet. Actually, it's still frozen as well. See if I can't scrape a little wood off of this. A little fuzz. Using the back of the knife to create some fuzz that would catch a spark easy, if that's what you wanted to do with it. And it works well enough. So that's definitely light enough that that would catch a spur. But I do happen to have fat wood with me, and that's, of course, a much easier way to get a fire going than it is with scrapings like that. So let's see what that does. Oh, keep this from moving around. That's hard wood, that fat wood, you know. All right, fat wood scrapings, does that well enough. One thing that I try to remember now is after I've finished doing the scraping, to get some of the goo off of the back of the blade before I try to hit the ferrocerium rod with it. All right. Don't smack your fat wood shavings. And I know there's a better way of doing this, which is to hold the knife and move the ferro rod. That catch? Nope. That's a bit better. All right, I'm a little out of practice from doing this, to be quite honest, but obviously it threw the sparks and it lit the fat wood. And so I think we've done enough now that we can wrap this video up. All right, a few closing thoughts for the Dożyn handmade knife from Poland. So first thing I want to address is the question I tried to answer, and that is about the heat treatment. So to begin with, the steel that was chosen, 52-100, is a high carbon steel, roughly equivalent to 1095, a high carbon steel that people are more familiar with in North America. Very close in many ways in composition. Also capable of being hardened to a high degree just through a regular heat treatment process. Good edge holding, good toughness. But when you take that same steel and you heat treat it into a bainite state, it should theoretically increase the toughness of this knife dramatically. And I'm here to tell you it does. It really makes this a tough steel. This knife has been through a lot, as you should show on the knife itself. I have been wailing on it, and I don't say that often. I have really been not intentionally trying to break the knife, but everything short of it. I've put it through pieces of wood much heavier than what you saw me baton here today. I have driven it in on end and just tried to see how far I could get it in, and then had to work to get it back out again. And the knife has definitely withstood that. Not only has it been tough enough, and I've seen some bends on the steel of this knife that I would have been afraid for on any other knife, but not on this knife. It just sprung right back to straight like you wouldn't even know it had happened. But not only that, it's held its edge. No chipping, no rolling. Yes, I have had to lightly sharpen it on a ceramic rod and then to strop it again. But even now, after everything I've done today, it feels as sharp as it was when I brought it out. So the heat treatment for this achieved not only that legendary toughness that bainite is capable of, but has been tweaked enough to keep the edge hard enough for good edge retention. Good job on the heat treat itself. Now, the only other thing I want to comment on, as I alluded to a few minutes ago, is the scales themselves. I really like the material that was chosen. I like the color, I like the texture, I like the feel and everything else in my hand. But it could use some more width here. It could use some more contouring here, and it would just be a little bit more comfortable, because what I found in doing the feather sticking is that prolonged holding, now maybe it's just my XL hands, but prolonged holding did get a little bit tiring on the hand itself. Not uncomfortable, just tiring, because I had to hold on tighter to maintain that control. At the same time, the shape and format on both ends of this, you know, it's functional. It's not necessarily beautiful, of course, beauty being in the eye of the beholder. This is a functional bushcraft knife that I would not be afraid to pick up and take out with me and have full trust in that it's going to do its job. And as I mentioned in the opening, the value of this knife at $137 Canadian, I'm not sure how you can beat that anywhere. Okay, those are my thoughts on the Dożyn. I would open this up to you. What are your thoughts from what you've seen? Do you have any experience with it? Have you heard about it anywhere else? If you're interested, of course, all the specifications as well as the links to where you can take another look at it will be in the video description. But until next time, get out and explore and take that path less traveled. because it will make all the difference. Bye for now.